Hey, good morning. Let's go ahead and maybe get started. First off, I'd like to thank everyone for being here. Today we'll celebrate the life of Max Gruenberg. Kayla, thank you for being here, and thank you for the years of that you and your family allowed Max to be a part of our family. So I'll probably talk a little bit about some of my Maxisms later on. I'd like to introduce Representative Tuck, Senator Gardner, and President Meyer for being here, and a number of other members that are here. If there's those of you that would like to maybe speak up here in a little bit about Max or your favorite memories with Max, there's a piece of tape down there on the floor. They've got a handheld mic, and it'll look a little better for presentation purposes on gavel to gavel. So if you'd kind of cooperate, if you can. If you can't, then we'll take the mic to wherever you are, but it would probably work out easier. I guess, it's been my honor to serve with Max for numerous years, and while Max and I may not have seen eye to eye on most issues, one thing that we could agree on is that Max had a good heart. Max was interested in the system, and everything that Max did was for the betterment of a piece of legislation that passed. He may not have agreed with it, but he wanted to make sure that it was done right. And so, I always admired that about Max, and I always enjoyed his company. Even though sometimes, and I'll say it, he was a pain in the butt. But he was our pain in the butt. And so I just, as I said earlier, Kayla, I want to thank you and your family for allowing Max to be a part of our family for as many years that he was. So, Chris, you want to?
Yeah, thank you, Mike. And I think it's perfect that mention how we are family. And when I think about what family member Max was, he was really the grandpa of the legislature. He had a lot of children and grandchildren that bickered, but he always made sure that it was done respectfully. He always intervened when he needed to intervene. He always was concerned about each and every one of us. And he did that very sincerely and very genuinely. And all those at eases wasn't necessarily for his issues as it was for other people's issues. And he took them up one by one. And he took them up every time. And it just talks about the great, it really speaks to the great parliamentarian that he always was. And the reason why is because he really believed in this institution, and he did everything he could to maintain the integrity of this institution. Max, for me, was my training wheels, but oftentimes he really was my crutches. I couldn't even limp around without him. It's going to be tough for all of us because of the hole that he's left in the legislature.
So I kind of ask myself, in the years to come, how will I look back at Max, and what characteristics will really kind of come to my mind? And some of the stuff people have already said. He was a sweet, very kind, very generous person. He was generous with his time, with his attention. If you took something to Max and you wanted to talk about it, he would give you almost a laser focus. He wasn't one of those people who was thinking what he was going to say next. He was listening to you with his full attention, and you always knew that. The other thing I think about him is that he sort of came out of a Talmudic attention and a Talmudic tradition. He loved study for its own sake. He loved the attention to detail. He loved the law. He loved making sure that things were done correctly, that they went the way they were supposed to. And that was, a part of him. And I think the biggest characteristic that I always enjoyed was his pure joy in life. He found just immense pleasure in small things, in playing with his dog, in finding the right story to make somebody laugh or to make a point that he wanted to do. He loved his road trips, and he had a lot of funny stories about road trips and how, he could exasperate people by reading all the fine print on every display and take forever. I could just imagine it. And then one thing that I also think about with Max is, he'd fall asleep and you'd think, you wonder if he's going to fall off the chair or something. And then the talking would stop and he'd open his eyes and ask a really pertinent question. He was just biding his time in comfort. So anyhow, he's a great guy as a whole.
Kevin?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is a very somber day, but on the bright side, we had 72 years with Max with us here on, and we're all better because of it. And I didn't spend too many years with Max in the House. I see the minority leader and the past minority leader and the mayor of Anchorage is here, who spent probably more time with Max than I did, but the time I had with him was very precious, and I'm honored to have had that privilege to serve with Max as long as I did. But when I was in the Senate, and I'm still in the Senate.
What are you saying?
One of the things I knew, and I think we all know in here, that if you want your bill to get passed, you better spend some time with Max, because Max, he was very detailed, and he was very concerned about getting your bill or anybody's bill done right. He's very concerned and had a lot of love for this institution and what we do here, and we're all better because of it and because of the time we had with Max. But a lot of my bills had to do with family and kids. And so Max and I would spend a lot of time talking about our kids and some of the challenges we all have with raising kids. But he loved his family very dearly. He had Kayla and Max had an adopted son, I believe. And as I have an adopted child as well, so we'd share some stories there. But I could tell he loved all his kids. He certainly loved you, Kayla. I think even his car had your license plate on it, if I recall. And I think one of the best pictures I've seen, and we're fortunate to have a lot of pictures here of Max. I really like the one with him and the dog, because you look at Max and you think, wow, he's a real rough, tough character, but he was really a teddy bear and a loving person. And I think just seeing him with the dog and family best represents the Max that I know and love. So thank you, Mr. Speaker.
And I guess before we get to others, I've always thought, and Kayla, maybe I can ask you, I've always figured that Max, somewhere either in his office or maybe at home, maybe downstairs in the basement, he's got a file cabinet, at least one, that is full of nothing but bills that he amended and made better. I never asked him that question. I wished I had, because I probably know the answer. And Max reached far and wide. Just his influence wasn't just in this building. Actually, down in the harbor down here, I believe there's still a boat down there that's named after Max. It's called the Brief at Ease. And it was a boat that I believe former Representative Mike Kelly from Fairbanks named, and I believe he named it after Max for the amount of at eases that we used to have on the floor. So with that, others that would like to maybe stand in front and talk about Max, we'll sure open up the floor to any other discussions and conversations.
I got one, actually.
Dan?
Oh, goodness. On the spot here, but...
There's the spot right now.
Yeah, that's the spot. Well, goodness. I obviously remember Max with great affection and fondness and experience. I remember that my second term, I came down here on one of the ill-fated ferries that very few people were on there. I think it was myself and Kayla and Max and maybe one other legislators. So we had 2.5 days of very rocky weather, during which Max took every opportunity to lobby me on SB 21 and oil tax reform. Just a little bit more. I'd be glad to help you, Representative Sadler. I'd be glad to give you some advice. And while I'm not Jewish, I have an appreciation for the Yiddish language. There's 2 words I think that are important when you consider Max. One was nudge. He was always nudging just to get a little bit more, just trying to find a new way to do it. And he was very effective at that, obviously. But the second word is mensch. And the implication is a real stand-up guy, a real man, a man's man who had integrity and honesty, and the kind of guy you go to in a difficult situation. So Max was a nudge and a mensch.
For the
It'd probably
gavel to
better,
gavel.
you probably don't need a microphone, but it'd probably be better for gavel to gavel.
Well, Max and I, and of course many of you, we were all friends with Max. Mike, if we're gonna, if Max is, if being a pain in the ass is going to be part of somebody's legacy, that's going to be part of all of our legacies. So we might as well, that's just that just goes unspoken. We'll all remember ourselves that way. Max was a great person. He was funny. He always had your back. I guess I'll start off with one of my favorite stories about Max. We were always concerned about Max's health at times, right? I mean, Max had been in the hospital a few times, and Governor Murkowski, who started out very popular, ended up, as we all remember, becoming less popular in his later years. And he was giving a State of the State speech, and I could see that Max had fallen asleep. And so I immediately got a note over to Sharon Cisna, wake Max up. I didn't want that to be a campaign picture of him falling asleep. And I said, Max, I just want to make sure you didn't get in trouble. And Max said, how am I going to get in trouble? I'll just say that Frank Murkowski put me to sleep. So, Max is always quick. Sorry, Frank. That's just what Max said. I'm glad that Ethan is here, because Ethan, there are a few members of our caucus who've been members of the Jewish faith, either members of the other caucus too, and Ethan came up with the term Yama caucus. Though after Ethan left, with the amount of bacon that Max and Adam and all of the Jewish members of the legislature ate, we started calling ourselves the Bacon Caucus. So. I will just, this is important to me. Max did change a lot of bills. Max was very detailed, but that's not the essence of Max. And I know that reporters who don't know Max will just look and see what bills did he pass. That's not the mark of a legislator. The mark of a legislator is what you believe in. Much of what you ever get done doesn't have your name on it. No reporter, most members of the public will never know. But Max's true passion was giving people a chance in the world, regardless of their background, regardless of whether they were born wealthy, poor, or whatever. Max's view was that everybody deserved a chance. I've said it before, but he really believed that part of the Pledge of Allegiance that said, "And liberty and justice for all," not for some, for all. And if there was an essence of Max, it was not in the amendments that he did. It was in what he believed in. And what he believed in is that everybody deserved a fair shake. And you'll never see his name on the parts of the budget that did that. You'll never see his name on the things that he did that moved those things forward. And so for those people who think the essence of Max are the few bills that are the bills that you can find that had his name on them, those are nice things, and the amendment thing, that was like a side business for Max. This is just, but he probably should have had a business license for it, but that was not his essence. His essence was his care for everybody. I guess maybe he had two essences, and the other was that you could always trust Max. Max did not know how to lie. Max honored his constituents and all of us by being truthful. He was an honest man. And Max was just part of that team. It was the Max and Kayla show. Kayla didn't show up publicly, but Max and Kayla were a great team, and I miss him.
Others? Bob? Oh. Governor, thanks for joining us.
Boy. Mark on the floor. Whoa. Well, you know, we're all family here. And to me, Max was close family. Because we talked a lot about things, not just about some piece of legislature, but just a lot of personal things we talked about. And he was a great counselor to me on many things, not necessarily legislative things. The first time I met Max was at the what we call the Jerry Peoples beauty pageant, you know, where we all walk through and introduce ourselves during campaign season. And I'd never seen him before, but I met, you know, as a politician, I wanted to get at the end of the line so I get more attention. But this old guy was down there, he was trying to get in, and we were just going back and forth like do-si-do. And I'd never met him before, and I said, I know what you're doing. He said, I know what you're doing. And I think he won. I don't know about that. I think he won. One of the most memorable stories, and I was told this to many people, I had a bill in Judiciary Committee, simple little bill. No bills are simple, but this seemed to be simple. I think you were the chair at that time. And of course, Max had an amendment, a couple, you know, and, you know, he was a very articulate individual, very articulate, well-spoken. But this time, he was saying, I don't know if you remember that, Liesl, or not. And he got the amendments passed, and good little amendments. A couple of minutes later, I looked up, and Max wasn't there. I said, where's Max? Oh, he's having a heart attack. So he was trying to get these amendments through in the middle of a heart attack. There are no amendments that important. You know, I just couldn't believe it. But again, you know, he, ever since I've been chair of State Affairs Committee, he is on right to my left. So I say, why do you have, I want to keep control of the guy. He's right next to me. So I'd be trying to, and he'd go, Mitchie Timmy, jeez, you know, what a great individual. And again, his office has been next door to mine for a long time. And I think he lived in my office as much as I lived in his. And he made my life better. God bless you, Kayla.
If I could stand, not that I want my back to you, I just want to stand right here.
Don't trust?
So,
you don't trust us?
We are on the same bowling team. I keep telling people we are not competing on bowling scores, especially after I've seen him bowl. There was no competition there at all. You know, Lieutenant Governor Malott and I decided to leave a meeting early and start another meeting late to come down and let's say a few words about Max. I remember when I first met Max, and his treatment of me was consistent throughout. Whatever I was doing, whatever position I might hold, he was still always had plenty of time to stop. And I always, you know, this is an odd thing to say, he kind of reminded me of my mother in some respects. I always learned something from him. Whenever any conversation I had with Max, I walked away knowing something that I didn't know before we had the conversation. And he would never run out of time. I mean, I never ever remember a time that I talked with him. And he reminded me a bit of some of my first mentor attorneys, Dave Thorsness and John Hughes, when I went to work at Hughes Thorsness, who would sort of take you under their wing and sort of talk about certain things and not in a condescending way, in a very kind way. So if there was one word I would describe him, he was an extremely kind individual, and it made no difference who you were, what you were doing. If you needed help, even if you didn't need help, he would bring to you a solution to a problem that I didn't know existed, that I didn't know was a problem. And so it was. I have so many good memories of him in that role. And whether it was in the stairway, sometimes I like to take the stairway rather than the elevator, just because I'll run into somebody, and often I'd run into Max, and we'd just stop and have this conversation about something, and you could tell he was speaking from the heart. He wasn't carrying out sort of a to-do list for somebody. He was doing what he felt was the right thing to do, and that just shone through true and true. So he will be missed. His mark is, as you know, is much larger than this building, much larger than his district. It's the entire state of Alaska, because he didn't know boundaries of kindness. It just spread throughout. So it's a huge loss. We, as a state, are much better as having him for as long as we had him in this building. So, Lieutenant Gunham, if you wanted to say a few words.
Members of the Alaska Legislature, thank you so much for pausing, as you would do and must do for any member in this circumstance. Kayla, I just want to very briefly say this. They were at our home the other night, and in a conversation with Max, who, as has been said here, is a wonderfully good man, good for Alaska. We were talking about a puppy, and Max and Kayla were thinking about another puppy. And as he was putting on his shoes to leave, he was still talking about a puppy. And I think that he is gone looking for a puppy. And Kayla, he will bring one to you, and it will be loving, and it will be nurturing, and it will be as good and wonderful a memory to all of us as he was a living, loving person.
Just wanted to say a couple of things about Max. We relatively new in the legislature, so he and I had a really good time working together on the Judiciary Committee. And when I learned on Sunday morning that he had died earlier that day, my first thought was that Max would be, he must have been saying the night before, he just couldn't imagine living life without Antonin Scalia on the Supreme Court. And I think the reason was, part of that was because Max really always wanted to look at the details in the same way, and he always had his own perspective on things. But one of the things that really struck me too about Max, he was a Jewish guy from San Francisco, and you really don't think of him as a cowboy, but he would be somebody that would always want to say that he wanted to die with his boots on. And when I thought about Friday in Judiciary, when he had worked carefully with the Judiciary Chair to figure out how to get the naloxone bill heard by Judiciary and heard by this body, even when we were not going to be talking about anything except the budget, he recognized this was a bill about saving lives, and he worked within the Capitol to make that happen. And then he came in and he had 3 amendments, and he had worked with all of us carefully before we ever sat down at the meeting to make sure that not only did we all agree with those amendments, but we thought they were a good idea. And so all 3 amendments passed unanimously, and we passed the bill out of committee and sent it onto the floor. And when I heard that he had died, the real thought I had was that this was a guy who got to die with his boots on. He was on his game on Friday in every sense of the word. He was out with family and friends on Saturday, on his game in every sense of the word. And we lost him on Sunday. And the words of former Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall made the comment that, what would you want me to say? And Justice Marshall would say what I would say about Max, that he did what he could with what he had.
David?
Well, for those of you that don't know, Max and I were twins. I think it was the haircut. I could never quite figure out what it was about. In the Jewish faith, it is an honor to be called a mensch. A mensch is a man. A mensch is a real person. Max and I would talk all the time about dogs, his dog, my dog, whatever it is. It's a considerable part of your life. But at the end of the day, when you examine what Max did, he always did the right thing, right? We would see bills come across into our caucus, and we would say, what should we do with this? We know there's something wrong with it. Should we fix it? Should we not fix it? And Max, you always do the right thing. You always do the right thing. And it's a wonderful thing to be remembered as a person who's a mensch and always wanted to do the right thing.
I had the good fortune of serving with Representative Gruenberg in representing Mountain View, East Anchorage for this was our 10th session together. And so I have many, many Max stories, but I'm going to keep it short. Max was like a mentor to me and a crutch to me. And I remember the first year that we had served together, my first year in office, we had a very contentious meeting in Mountain View. And people were screaming and yelling. And they had questions and they demanded answers. And I turned to Max and I said, Max, you can answer that question. I think the thing that really epitomizes Max to me is he was such a kind and gentle soul. And he really just deeply cared about people. And he would chase you down the hall and he would sit there and talk with you for as long as you would talk with him about an amendment, about a bill, about an idea, about an issue in the district. And I remember probably hundreds of community councils that we attended together. And he was accompanied with Kayla, probably every single one. And he would start every meeting saying, my name is Max, I'm the husband of Kayla Epstein. And Kayla, our deepest condolences to you. We're all gonna miss Max. I hear a lot of people say in this building that we should leave this institution a better place, and Max has certainly done that. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. I just want to touch on something here that's very important to me, and I just want to echo everybody's comments about Max because he treated me with the same respect, both as a Commissioner of Labor and as a fellow colleague in this building. But we couldn't do any of this that we're talking about if Max had not went into the United States Navy, defended our country for our freedom. Thank you, Max.
Gabrielle?
I knew Max forever. I mean, I came to Alaska December 31st, 1978, and in the first 1 or 2 months that I was here, I met Max. So I've actually known Max longer than I've known my kids, longer than I've known anybody else. And I mean, serving with Max, I've been chairing the Judiciary Committee for the last year, and that's been an experience. And he'd drive me nuts sometimes, lots of times, maybe 90% of the time. You know, he'd be going down these absolute rabbit holes. But you always knew that you had to listen to what he was saying, because it was that 10% of the time that he would keep us from doing things that were really, really, really stupid. And thank you, Max. And we're all going to miss you.
When I came into the legislature in 2003, Max was elected at that time too. He'd been here before. But our first committees we were on together were State Affairs. And so State Affairs for several years, lots of bills coming in there looking at interagency, intergovernment relations, and Max, he's been called the great amender, and we had a great time. And when I was chair of state affairs, you could always know that every bill was going to get some amendment or amendments from Max. And it was great because you knew Max was one of those guys that read every bill, didn't just look at the sponsor statement. He read the details and said, oh, this doesn't relate to what the sponsor statement says it does. So we would get those changes. And it was interesting because it was almost like a free flow of mental information there, because sometimes the amendment would be there and then we would talk about it in committee, and of course the amendment would get withdrawn because it was one of those rabbit trails that Representative Ledoux was just talking about, and they say, well, no, we don't need that. And so it was great discussion, and it was personal. And after I was no longer on that committee with Max, we still have maintained a great friendship. Last year at the Girl Scouts banquet, we bought a gooey duck dinner together. And so, it's just been great to be with Max because he's always ready to try something different. And so I'm going to miss him greatly. And his wonderful attitude that he had around here, and door always open. And on Friday, I was just talking with him amendments about the bill and going over one of those. So he'll be greatly missed. Okay.
Anybody?
Max and I were elected to the legislature in 1984. And that's when I met him. So, I sat between him and Peter Gall my first 2 years in the legislature, and it was a challenge for a couple of reasons. But I got along great with Max, and Max he always paid attention to the details in debate. And I recall one time we were discussing an insurance bill. I was a floor manager, and I wanted to make the provisions of the bill retroactive to the first year. It was a tax change, and I wanted to make it retroactive to the first of the year. And Max, sitting next to me, stood up, and we're debating with each other, really, with the rest of the House listening. And he says, that is unconstitutional. You can't go back to the first of the year. And he was very passionate about it. Max was a very, very passionate person about public policy. He really cared. And so in the course of the debate, he was making the argument that it was unconstitutional. And I stood up and said, he might be right, but even if he's right, then the courts will determine that. But our liability, if is growing every day. And so anyway, he was listening closely to what I was saying, and after having made a passionate argument against it, he listens to it. I can see the wheels turning. I'm sure he wasn't a very good poker player because he wore his expressions all the time on his face. He was listening to the discussion, and as soon as I got done and sat down, he popped straight up and he said, he's right. I withdraw my objection. That was one of my favorite remembrances. I see Sam Cotton's here. Sam was a speaker. I was a majority leader in 89 and 90. And Max and Peter Gall co-chaired the Judiciary Committee. And Ethan was reminding me today, he had heard the story about them actually measuring the judiciary chambers and allocating exactly equal shares to each other. And Sam would get so frustrated as speaker about what happened sometimes, not in the Judiciary Committee, but between the two chairs. So Sam would say, I'm not sending that bill to Judiciary. I know they're just going to mess it up. Max and Peter they're just going to hold it up. This needs to pass. I'd say, Sam, it's a constitutional amendment. It has to go to judiciary. Those are my two stories. Max was great. Kayla, condolences. Thanks for sharing.
May I follow up? I'll be brief, I promise. But Mike was a great referee because every morning, one of the primary jobs of the speaker is to assign bills to committees. And so I'd get the list out, and every day Max would come up with his own list of where these bills ought to go, and we'd argue, and finally Mike would have to be the referee. And I was telling this story to Speaker Chenault, and he says, he still does that.
Yeah, sometimes my where I sign the bills are not where he thinks they ought to go.
One other quick remembrance of Max. We both served in the Navy. We were both in Vietnam. We're both in the Gator Navy, or the amphibious forces, and I was enlisted. He was an officer. We weren't on the same ship, but we shared a lot of stories there. And it just, I always looked at Max and thought, boy, there's a guy, a naval officer. He was a gunnery officer and a deck officer, and it just was hard to imagine Max Gruenberg, and I suspect the captain of the ship put up with the same thing and enjoyed what we've all enjoyed about Max too. So thank you.
You know, you've heard a lot of people say that Max was a mensch, but he was a mensch with nachas. You can look it up. And it takes a lot of courage to stand up every day in a legislature and do the right thing regardless of what the cost is. And that kind of conviction is something that I think is part of the best tradition of this legislature. I mean, when I walk through these halls, I'm filled with memories. But I'm also remembering the promise of what this institution can deliver for people. And Max lived that every day. He gave his life to this institution and for this institution and for the people that it serves. And that's a legacy that will endure for a long, long time. So thank you, Kayla. And thank you, Max.
I work in House Records, and I'm the recording secretary for House Judiciary. And I have the honor of transcribing the back and forth between But I would like to speak to Representative Gruenberg's kindness. He and his wife went to the beaches of Normandy, and I heard him offer on the floor that they brought sand back for the legislators and staff. And so I contacted him, and he sent me this beautiful card and a vial of sand. And my father was in the third wave in the beach, on the beach, and now I have this sand to pass down through my family for the rest of our lives and generations to come, just because of his kindness and thoughtfulness. And I will truly miss him.
Well, Kayla, Margaret called on Sunday, and she remarked, wow, that's a strong woman. And she really appreciates her friendship with you. For Max, my first experience was in 1987. And Max, he didn't know myself or my boss, which was Lyman Hoffman. And Tom Begich started hanging around with me and Lyman. Me and Lyman are in our mid-30s and from Western Alaska. And we enjoyed the relationship that we got to have with Tom Begich at the time because he was working for Max. Later on, he told us why. He says, Max assigned Tom to get to know Bob and Lyman. He had to know what Lyman was like. And I think we slightly corrected Begich because he was much younger than us at the time. But one final thank you to Max is that on Friday we're in the lounge and I told him I was working on a resolution and I explained it to him and he says, I'm all in. And that resolution, which is very special to him and to many of us in this room, to everyone, it was about post-traumatic stress injury. And so I wish I would have got a signature right then and there, but in memory of Max, I'm going to introduce that resolution this week.
Thank you. Max has been a mentor to all. He's been a leader really in this legislative halls for a long time. And for me, I had a grandmother in this legislative hall, was Representative Peggy Wilson out of Wrangell, and Max was Grandpa Max. And so I do treat everybody as family. It's already been stated Max was the amender. And I knew that if I had a bill in front of the Judiciary Committee or State Affairs Committee, I was never afraid of the chair or any of the majority members. I was always afraid of Max trying to amend the bill right there on the fly, even though I needed to rush this bill out as soon as I could. And so it was important for me to talk to Max ahead of time, and I think a lot of other people knew and respected that as the case. Max was a great statesman, and he was a leader in this legislative body. He was a lousy politician. He would say things, he would do things that were uncharacteristic for politicians because we're very reserved. And I think that the genuineness that Max brought to this legislative body should be adopted by all of us. We would have discussions in caucus about a bill that we didn't like, and Max didn't want to try and count votes and kill it. He wanted to try and make it a better bill, and that's really Max's legacy. Finally, it was really hard to get a hold of Max, especially on some of these emergency meetings that the caucus would have. But we knew for sure that we could call one person and she would be sitting next to him, and that was Kayla. And Kayla, a lot of legislators, maybe they get kicked out of their homes for 3 months or they get shipped off. I know Kelly thinks it's a vacation when Les is here as opposed to back at home, but Max and Kayla were inseparable. They're together all the time, and it was a constant assurance for me as a caucus member that Max had you. And not just that he had that you personally, but he also had his staff, his very loyal staff, both Nikolai and Ted. And I know that that the three of you miss him as much as I do. Thank you.
I'm standing up here today because I think Max would like me to do that, but I want to say that Max and I bonded our freshman year. He and I went to the Bacon Fest together, and we had such a fun time that we tried to go every single year. And Max, I just thought that was really intriguing because he was a Jew and he was such an amazing man. But so we had such a good time that we decided to have breakfast together. And Kayla, you were such a lovely host. And so my job was to bring the bacon. So I found the best bacon. It was similar to the bacon I used to eat when I lived in Norway, and it's at Jerry's Meat. So if anyone wants outstanding bacon, I've never found it anywhere in the Alaska except at Jerry's Meat. So there's awesome bacon there. But the last thing Max said to me on Friday is he says, "I've got something for you in my office." I said, "Guess what, Max? I have something for you too." So I have some bacon candy that I'd like to make sure that I give you in memory of Max. And then I want to extend an invitation to everybody that if anyone wants to go to Bacon Fest with me next year, I'm all about that. It's the best event in Juneau. Anybody else?
I'm going to come up beside Les as well. I don't want my back to you guys either. Kayla, I'm speaking for you. I didn't want to speak today. My father passed. It reminds me of a lot of it. They mentored each other. They fought honorably together, and sometimes were on each other's sides. And so it hits home in very emotional ways. But I'm speaking for you because you're the living. And I want to say what an honor it was that you and your family gave Max and his life to this state. He and I met when I was 29, and I could echo many of the sentiments of the current Judiciary Chair. There were moments I felt we were married, and I want to say in all the worst ways. It was just the part about negotiating everything. And I remember Ethan was the minority leader, and I placed a phone call, and you're going to hear this now for the first time. And I said, "Ethan, we've been friends a long time." And I was Judiciary Counsel, and I was very fair to Republicans and Democrats. I need one thing from you, just one. What is it? Please do not put both Les Guerra and Max Gruenberg on Judiciary as the minority members. I beg you. I begged him, and I called and called and called. The phone rings after the organization. He said, "Liesl, I don't know what to tell you." I said, "I know what you're going to tell me." And he said, "You'll be better for it." And I am better for it. And I am better for it. Lincoln surrounded himself famously with his intellectual rivals, and I wouldn't describe Max as an intellectual rival. I would describe him as an authentic detailed soul that challenged every one of us every day to be better than what we were and to respect those blue books, which are the fabric of our society. And every word in them matters. And I would be humbled after many of our judiciary exchanges that he thought of something that if I had thought of, I thought, we can move past that. In leadership and when you're in the majority, there's a rush sometimes to get things done. And Max reminded us that every word in those books mattered. And he truly gave his life. The stress of this job, the hours of this job, the all-consuming nature of it. Max was unhealthy, we knew it, and he came every single day, and he truly died for the state, and I thank you for that.
I don't want to stand all the way up here, but I guess I have to. So, try to keep my composure. So I don't want to say how long I've known Max because that will tell you guys how long I've been here. But, you know, everybody says that Max isn't a mender, and I think that Max was a fixer. And if any of you know me, that's what I try to be, you know, on both sides. And I look to him as an example and a mentor. Because he loved the job, not the office, but the job. And I hope that we can all try to be as loving of the job and its ability to do what's right for the state and the people. And he's an example as a spouse, and I look at his relationship with Kayla, and I hope that someday I can aspire to be as good of a fixer and as good as a spouse and as good of a servant of the people as Max was. It's easy to tell people what to do. It's so much harder to live a life as an example for people to aspire to. And I thank Max for doing that until the day he died, and I know we will all miss that here.
Me being a freshman legislator from Southeast Alaska, probably have known Max for a lot less time than almost all of you in the room. But I do remember first meeting Max, and one of the first phrases out of his, and it wasn't a phrase, one of the first things that he said to me was, "Is there anything I can do for you?" And then when I think back of my other conversations that I've had with him, he almost always would say that same thing. "Is there anything I can do for you, Representative Ortiz?" And so for me, when I think about Max, I like to think that if there's a definition for the word gentleman, Max Gruenberg should be added to that definition. He is the ultimate gentleman. Thank you.
So I've known Max for decades, and one thing we have in common, by the way, is we both left the same law office to come here, the law office of Gary Eschbacher. And so, Gary, if you're listening, I'm sorry for that. But you know, one thing, and a number of people have mentioned this, that really rings true for me is when I think about a specific bill, House Bill 47, Industrial Operation Injunctions. And I'm not going to get into the boredom of that topic, other than this. I decided in my mind that this was a really bad bill, and that I was going to lead the fight against the bill. And I said, "Max, you're going to join me in this fight?" And he said, "Andy, I worked with Representative Feige on this bill. My fingers," effectively, he said, "my fingers are on that bill." And we reached a consensus, and I think it's a workable bill. And so it offended, even though I think he saw that there were problems with the bill, it offended his sense of decency and decorum and his sensibilities. And it really speaks to his sense of honor. You know, there's this sense that Representative Feige didn't even need to be in the building. He had his back on that bill. They had reached a meeting of the minds. And wow, I mean, that's a great tribute to Max.
Anyone else? Peter?
Thank you. I'm a new guy, and different party, different part of the state. Max certainly didn't have to reach out to me, but from day one, he came to visit me and talked about some of the things I should look out for and some of the folks perhaps I should. I thought about that, and I have the same stories. We were in Judiciary the other day, and I was sitting between Bob Lim and Max, and it was very warm. It was very warm. I got sleepy, but the committee chair asked me to nudge Max and Bob periodically, and every time I woke up Max, he would thank me. He wasn't feeling very well that day, and again, anyone would be sleepy there, he would thank me. But about the fourth time I woke up Max, he thanked me, and he looked up, and he said, perhaps you can help Bob with the same courtesy. And I looked over, Bob was completely asleep, so it was sort of fun. And I, on the Maximize thing, as you know, I have a little bill that's on elections right now, and he came in with 2 amendments. One, the first one he talked to me about tripled the size of my bill. And I wasn't very receptive, and so he brought forth the second one, and that only doubled my bill. And I had the feeling after it that the first one wasn't really all that important. He was just making the second one better. But what I realized, people are here for different reasons, and people do things for different reasons, and often they do it. What they do is about them, and what Max did was never about Max. It was always about a better Alaska, and I wasn't going to say anything, but the main thing I wanted to pass on is that Erin is very fond of you, and she wanted me to let you know from both of us that we're here, and we will miss Max, and thanks for all you've done for this legislature as well.
I know I can do this. I think we often talk about how our elders are so important to us and what they've contributed and how much they have to offer. And experiences like this just really solidify. It almost is a sense of nervousness, like, what are we going to do without Max? Because he just knew so much, and as a person trying to learn and do a good job, you just could really benefit from someone who put that time into you and wanted to share that knowledge. And I got to sit next to him my first couple years, so I got to do the nudging when he was dozing off. But he was just such a sweet person, and that knowledge that he brought and the passion to the job, what I want to learn from him is, he turned that passion into patience in a way that I think is really productive around here, to be so thoughtful. And I hope, I can learn that from him and do a better job in the work that I do. So the rest of this session, I'm going to be thinking WWMD. What would Max do?
Yeah, I'm going to miss Max, and my family's going to miss Max. I'm a freshman, but I've known Max for decades now. He was one of the first few folks that I got to know when I got to Anchorage. And my family has a deeper connection to him. My brother-in-law, Trick Davis, clerked, and my husband, Mark Davis, also clerked with Max when they all clerked together in the Alaska Supreme Court. So we were colleagues, but we were also good friends. So I'm from a different party, and the first day after session, he comes quickly over to me. He hovers over me. He says, Liz, he says, I've got a bill we need to work together with. He said, this is going to be an example of bipartisanship working together. Folks from the two parties just working together to get things done. And he would always grin, big smile on his face when he said that. And he said that many, many times. But anyway, I decided to play a joke on Max. We started working on the bill, the pet bill, and although there are other things in this bill other than about pets, has a domestic violence provision and has a fiscal accountability provision, but it's well known as the pet bill in the media. And so we were working. Yeah, we were working. We were both pet lovers anyway. So he walks into my office, he sits down, and he wants to discuss the pet bill. So I looked at him seriously and I said, Max, I've got a conflict. I can't work on this bill. And his eyes got really big and his jaw was going to drop. And I said, I'm kidding. I'm just I'm a dog mom. That's my conflict. Because I've got goldfish and, parakeet, whatever. Anyway, so we started working on the bill, and we even went to a dog show. We did a dog show over at the State Fair during the summer, set up a little table and had literature about the bill and so forth, and talked to people about the bill. And Max was a very kind, gentle person, and he really cared a lot about this body, and he cared a lot about making things right, and about, there's always jokes about him amending things, but it was always about making it right. He sat right next to me in State Affairs, and he would open up the law books, and he would show me, what do you think, Liz? What do you think? And then, back and forth, we write notes and what have you. It was a pleasure to work with Max. I'm just sorry that I didn't have as long a time as a lot of you have had. We've had a long-standing relationship, and it's been a pleasure to work with his staff, Ted and Nicola and Kayla. It's been a pleasure to know you. I didn't know you as well. I know my family knew you, but I didn't get to know you until recently. And so he's going to be missed. He wanted things to be done right, and he had a passion for it. And he just, he was just such a kind man. It was never about one over you because you're in a different party or anything like that. It was about how can we make a better law, a better statute. And I have to admit, he's just he was a great guide and just very gentle. I will miss that. I will miss him as a colleague, as a mentor, and as a friend. So all three. Thanks. Speaker?
Anybody else? Kayla.
Okay, so I'm going to take Max's place and go last. I'm going to give you, of course, I've got a million stories, but I'm just going to give you a couple. First of all, before anything else, I want to thank you all for the kindness that you have shown. I haven't been alone. I haven't had to worry about meals. Things are being planned around me, and I just thank all of you. And if I haven't gotten back to you to say thank you, I've just been overwhelmed. Second, I wanted to give you a couple stories about details, and Max in his detailed way. He was at a community council meeting, and they handed out this big packet of stuff, and they're going through it, and they're talking, and it's got, all these figures down. And at the end, someone said, is there any questions about this? And Max raised his hand, and he said, yes, Max? He said, the things on this side of all the items and the total on this side are $1 million off. And that was Max. One day, he was on the floor, and they were about to vote, and he's waving and waving and waving, getting the speaker's attention. And finally, the speaker said, Max, what is it? And he said, the wrong number is on the board. You are all voting not on the bill you think you're voting on. So that was Max in details, but what I don't know anybody captured here is how good he was at the big picture. So as you all know, Chief Justice Scalia died just a short time ago, and everybody is going back and forth. Will he be replaced? What's the court going to be like? And Max, like this, said, well, the cases that are coming up are from more liberal courts, and it's been 5-4 vote, generally for more conservative answers, more conservative decisions. And now it's going to be 4-4, which means they won't pass. So the liberal courts that have been coming up, they're going to all remain as they are until a new justice is appointed. And no one else had said anything like that. Everybody had been in the detail, but he had seen the bigger picture. And the last thing I want to say, which is probably most inappropriate at this time, to talk about legislature, but I guess Max and I were well matched in being nudges. But I know all of his bills that he is carrying right now are non-controversial, and they'll probably go through just fine on his name, and they're non-controversial, but out of love of him, I think they'll go through a little faster. But a bill that was my passion was to go back to 120 days. You can't imagine how hard Max was working. You know, a lot of his falling asleep was because he was working all night, making sure that everything was right. And Sunday night, he didn't get any sleep at all. Some of that may have been watching TV or grazing in the kitchen, but I know a lot of it was looking at work. And a 90-day session starts jerky, maybe with freshmen who are expected to go like this into leadership positions, bills that all have to be filed before the legislature even starts. You don't have your colleagues around to do the stew that you need to come up with good legislation. And I just really hope that you will look kindly on that bill and think about Max. Thank you all.
Chris?
Thank you,
Wrap
Mr.
up.
Speaker. Kayla, I'd like to share a story with you. Saturday night, a bunch of us went over to the sandbar for fish and chips, where you were with friends, and you came by and visited us afterwards. And as both of you walked away, I looked over at David Guttenberg and said, "Man, how did Max score such a good woman?" And from everybody speaking today, it's clear how he did it. Also, it takes a great man to have a woman like you, but you also made Max a greater man. And we want to thank you for all your commitment to him and sharing him with us. Thank you very much, Kayla.
With that, thanks everyone for coming. Thanks for participating, and may Max rest in peace. With that, we'll close out the meeting and go about our other work. Thanks for coming. Hey, why don't you get out of here?
Lovely. That was wonderful. That was very well done.
Oh, I gotta go up there. It's gonna have a comment out of it, so just so you know. Well, we have to amend it on the floor. It's only reasonable. Come on. Come on.
Oh, yeah.
They will.
I looked at them and I...
But we're working on it.
Yeah, we are.
I told you about that resolution.